Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chatter, a podcast from The Gist, with me, Josh Hamilton. In this episode, we have got a real champion of socialist politics, a man crazy enough to try and steal seats from Sinn Fein in West Belfast and in the Stormont canteen. It's the Before Profit MLA, Gerry Carroll. We got into everything from student activism and the climate strikes to the threat of Before Profit and other grassroots parties to the dominance of Sinn Fein and the DUP, and even being kept off the debate floor in Stormont. If you haven't already and you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and to our mailing list, and don't forget my book, BREXIT, The Establishment Civil War, is now available for pre-order on Amazon. You'll find the link in the description below. So without further ado, here's Gerry Carroll. So, yeah, thanks for agreeing to chat to me, Gerry. It's a real pleasure.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
So I'll not waste your time here. Why would you be so mad in your life as to decide that, you know, West Belfast isn't enough of a stronghold for Sinn Fein, and they are obviously very beatable in that part of Northern Ireland? When you decided you wanted to go into politics, why would you challenge them in that stronghold? Why not go for somewhere easier? Like, you probably have got it in South Belfast with all the like garden centre liberals. Why West Belfast?
I mean, there's nothing wrong with garden centre liberals, like, but it's not my my audience or my community. But I suppose when you put it like that, it's an interesting question. You know, it was some time ago when I first did. I think what's that? 9 years ago now. I think 2011. Yeah, 9 years ago. So I mean, with everything, and I don't want to discuss some of the stuff, but with everything that's happened, it seems like a lifetime ago. But to put it simply, basically, I mean, I was politicized around, I don't know, 16, 17, sort of late teenage years. Became, I don't know, a socialist at sort of 17 or 18 or 19. I don't know what precise year, you know, but it became radicalized politically in terms of you seeing the need for anti-capitalist politics, and we'll talk about that if you want, in terms of what that means. And for me, obviously, as you said, growing up in West Belfast, family members in Sinn Fein, I would presume most of my family did vote Sinn Fein. Hopefully they all vote for me now, but I know quite a lot of them do. Maybe not all, but we can talk about that. But for me, basically, I wanted to see socialist politics, and there was a gap, I suppose, across Ireland generally, but especially here. And Sinn Fein, obviously, you know, at some points proclaimed to be, flirted with, whatever language you want to use, socialist politics or socialist rhetoric. But very much up until or through the period of sort of early 2000s, when I was sort of, you know, coming of age, so to speak, they kind of dropped all that stuff. So for me, I was being radicalized, I was being politicized by anti-capitalist thoughts of whatever sort, and the anti-war sort of protests in Belfast and across the world. And to me, Sinn Fein just didn't seem to be central to any of that. So I therefore get involved with Before Profit, and then one thing led to another, and my face was on a poster. I have a lamppost, quite a lot of them, and then things developed from that. But it is an interesting way, the way you put it.
Well, it just seems like for someone who's socially left or economically left, that would Sinn Fein, as someone living in Belfast, I'm assuming you're nationalist and you would probably prefer United Ireland. That just basically what I'm saying is all the tick boxes suggest that you should be running as a Sinn Fein MLA, and instead you decided to get involved with Before Profit. How did you find the guys involved with that? Did you meet Eamon McCann, or was there someone else?
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I'm for United Ireland, but I wouldn't say I'm a nationalist. I'm from a sort of nationalist community and strong Republican area. You know, that's obviously true in terms of the lack of representation in West Belfast. But, you know, there's a history of Labour sort of labour struggle, labour ideas, and working class sort of ideas in West Belfast. Sometimes that sort of falls into or is connected to republicanism, but there's not. It's not like it's totally alien from people. I had some friends in school with St Mary's in West Belfast, in Glen Road, and some friends were in People Before Profit. One of them actually stood for us in 2007. And I got involved in his campaign. Sort of, it was an anti-water charges, anti-war campaign. And then, I don't know where, but I met Ewan McCann somewhere along the way. Obviously, very sort of, how would you say,
fiery.
What?
Fiery is probably the word I would use.
Yeah, fiery is good. Yeah, definitely fiery, historic, and great sort of character and great stories and all that. And for me, just kind of to sort of tie it into the first part, it's the binary options in the north are you're from West Belfast, you have to be sort of nationalist or Sinn Fein. You're from East Belfast, you have to be red, white, and blue Protestant. That's the way we're told things have to be. That's the way politics has to be. And I think from whatever age, I kind of maybe didn't have a full theory of rejecting that, but it didn't sit comfortably with me. And then I think People Before Profit, I think in a difficult society, in a divided society, I think done well, and I would sort of pat ourselves on the back, continue to do well. To try and bring people together in a working class, in a sort of people who are oppressed way, and for me, I think that's more relevant now than it's ever been, to be frank.
It's definitely a testament to the grassroots work that People Before Profit do to see them actually take a seat in West Belfast. If you'd said to someone before 2011, they would have laughed that was even possible. So, like, total respect for the work, because grassroots politics is incredibly important and will never stop being so. So it's always fantastic to see little small parties push into, make voices heard. What would you say your first memory of politics was? Like, you talked about being radicalized there. Was there a galvanizing moment?
Yeah, I mean, this was the first moment of politics. I mean, I always remember the news being on in the house. So there's always politics of some sort, but it wasn't, to my memory, it wasn't a house. I mean, I think my mother and father were very political in their own ways, but it wasn't a house where we were kind of, engaged in deep politics, because I think there was an element of, family wanted to protect sort of kids from the troubles and what was going on in the outside world. So there's a memory there, if you will. But two ones stand out in school. There was a mobile phone mast at the top of our top of the geography and English building in St Mary's, and there was a walkout against that. Basically, the argument at the time was that it could cause cancer, and whether it was sort of scientifically backed up or not, it's for other people to determine. But I would have been, I don't know, second or third year, and I wasn't really, I honestly can't remember if I specifically walked out, but I remember like other people walking out of school and walking down the big school lane, which was about a mile long. So there was that kind of bit of activism around the school. And like I said, I was maybe on the periphery of that. I don't think it was really involved at all. But the main moment was the Iraq War. So 2003, I think we were fifth or sixth year, and basically, obviously, there was a global movement against the war. I remember watching the news and reading papers quite sort of vividly, and just being not convinced of, and realizing that the Iraq War would lead to more carnage, and for whatever you want to say about Saddam Hussein, tyrant, and all that kind of stuff, I was convinced, and lots of others were. The Iraq War would be a bad thing, and obviously, tragically, we were proved right. So we walked out of school. Quite a lot of us walked out of St Mary's, and we joined the demonstrations. And after that, we were actually punished by the school by giving we were given a detention. I think the following Friday, the school was off for an Easter or a bank holiday, and we were brought in for a detention for walking out. And I remember from that moment just being absolutely furious. If anything, probably should have been maybe awarded. I don't know if that's too grandiose, but certainly maybe praised for being politically active. But the school, some elements of the school punished us, and from that, I suppose I became sort of politically active and involved.
How much impact do you think that kind of student activism can actually have? Like, how important do you think it really is, and how much is it just kids trying to get out of school? Because, for example, with the climate strikes that were going on last year, like, it was so inspiring to see so many people, like so many school kids, just out on the street in the big marches that were getting bigger and bigger and bigger every time they did one in Belfast. And then there was part of me that's just going, how many people even know why they're here? Because, I don't know, I kind of feel like kids can very quickly get caught up in that kind of thing just because it gets them out of school. How much impact do you think that can have? How important is it? Or is it more just helping kids like dip their feet into the world of activism?
Yeah, well, there's nothing wrong with them dipping their feet and getting involved in the world of activism. And I think it's very important. I mean, that kind of argument is always thrown out, particularly by sort of mainstream media and mainstream politicians, that students are just sort of out for a day off, But my point is that why they're not doing it the day before or the day after or the week after, they've picked obviously a specific day for a reason. And to be honest, I was involved in speaking at and attending the climate strikes, most of the protests. And I'll be honest with you, young people there were far more articulate than me now, using words that I couldn't pronounce or didn't know what they were in terms of describing biological species, and so they were incredibly articulate. And to be frank, I think specifically with the climate issue, people are watching the likes of David Attenborough, they're reading the news, they're families are talking about it more than ever. So I think it's they've definitely bought into it, and every movement. Remember the Occupy movement? There was kind of a criticism of it that they've no worked out end goal was the kind of the critique of it. Even though part of the Occupy movement was to say there's a class divide in society and we need to rectify that, which for me is a good start. But every movement has people who have ideas developed, don't have ideas developed, have ideology, don't have ideology, so it's part of getting people involved and getting people active. And every time there's a period, 1968 is being referenced in terms of historically as being sort of similar to today in terms of, the Black Liberation movement. And then and in 2003 and sort of around the climate stuff, you always see young people in terms of walking out of school or walking out of university. So I think it's part and parcel of history. And to be frank, I think it's essential. And for me, it certainly played a fundamental part in getting me politicized in my own way.
When did you realize you wanted to be a politician? Maybe you still don't want to be, but
yeah, that's true. I always say, I quite often say this. I never really woke up one day and went, I want to be a councillor or an MLA, and that's not my sort of. I am an MLA obviously, and I take that very, very seriously. But for me, it's a role I'm in because the politics brought me there, to be frank, and not to sound too abstract about it. So it's an honour to represent the people in my constituency, but for me it's using the MLA position and whatever prestige or whatever sort of elevate whatever prospect of elevating my voice. And there's an element of that with being an MLA, and I use that to support and promote campaigns. So I don't think I had a day where I woke up and, to be honest, and said I want to be an MLA. But obviously there was a time when I stood and was elected, and I suppose it happened from then.
What was the biggest shock to you the first time you went in as an elected MLA to Stormont? Was there a moment where something and you went, hang on, that's not, or you were really shocked about how something operated, or the amount of power, for example, that civil servants or special advisors had. I had Sam McBride on there a few weeks back talking about that sort of thing, and his work in Burned is fantastic. So I'm curious if you had any insights in that particular area.
Yeah, a couple of things. Not specifically spas. I haven't really came up against them, to be frank with you, in any sort of notable way, good or bad. I remember going into going into the chamber and having to sign the register as unionist or nationalist or other, and me and Eamon Khan, he was there at the time. Obviously, we wrote socialist on the register, which I think that might have been the first time that was done. So that's certainly a moment that we're proud of. I remember going into the canteen, excuse me, the canteen of Stormont, which is, I don't know if you've been in it, but it's kind of the basement floor. And we and Eamon and some of our colleagues were sitting at a table and having lunch, and a Sinn Fein member came up and said, "Gerry, I know you took a seat off us in West Belfast, but they'll be taking our lunch table." It was hilarious because, unbeknownst to me, there's unofficial, party tables, so Sinn Féin at one place, and I was at DUP sit at the back, and Alliance and the SLP and sort of UUP sit in the middle. Like this was our first day, we were like, it was funny, but it was a bit bizarre and kind of gave a sense of the even how the what do you call it, the lunchroom is sort of divided and whatever segregated. So that's kind of a bit of a funny insight, but also political in a sense. And then the other thing that kind of shocked me was very early on and nobody really knows this because it's not out in the public as much as it should be.
It's all right. Not many people listen to this show. Don't worry.
Oh well, no. I didn't mean that. I meant just before this. There's a thing called the Business Committee in Stormont, which basically sets the agenda for the week and decides when certain debates will happen, and mostly housekeeping sort of stuff. But I made a decision very early on that myself and Eamon and the Greens and Jim Allister and Claire Sugden and maybe somebody else, sort of the smaller and independents, would be moved down the pecking order in terms of speaking rights. So basically, there became debate after debate after debate where me and Eamon were trying to speak and we were told, sorry, time has run out. But before that happened, you had 3 or 4 Sinn Féin speakers, 3 or 4 DUP speakers, and it was a disgraceful way of trying to silence us. And as much as that infuriated me and still does, it kind of showed you that they were terrified of hearing our voices, because nothing like it, to be frank, was heard before.
So you really think they see as a serious threat, or just the idea that there could be people out there better representing the grassroots communities that they have claimed the DUP and Sinn Féin to represent for so long? Do you think do you think they fear that grip on those communities slipping away?
I think that's part of it, yeah. I mean, even in Sam McBride's book, in terms of the Stormont collapse in 2017, I mean, he cited people before profit calling demonstrations in Belfast and Derry to put pressure on Sinn Féin. And I don't want to over-egg it, but I think our role in 2017 played a part in Sinn Féin taking swift action. Because in normal times, Sinn Féin didn't put down Stormont over welfare reform and whatever else you want to say. NAMA, so many scandals in them. I think the reason, in part, why they forced Stormont, they pulled out of it, was because, I mean, there was public anger, obviously, on a massive scale around RHI. They were saying more seats could be vulnerable in their constituency if they didn't do something, and they saw, the rise of myself and Eamon, and they were threatened by that. So I think they are, and I think even if you look at Stormont now, there's trying to count them, six MLAs out of 84 who are not in the executive or whose parties are part of the executive. So I think more and more, and back in 2016 you had the official opposition, obviously. So more and more I think you need voices like ourselves, but also others like Greens and sort of others. And I think the bigger parties do not like that. They want, as you said, they want a cozy situation in Stormont. They want as much control and power in their communities as possible. And anything that sort of upsets that or challenges that, they despise.
Well, I actually have to say I'm quite grateful in Northern Ireland, despite our questionable coalition system, that we have the most representative voting system in the whole of the UK and one of the most representative in Europe, which is excellent. Which it gives me a little bit of hope in that when you see the Greens and the Alliance Party doing well, their vote share often translates into a fairly similar share of the seats. And that's like so crucial for the development of little movements, especially in times like this, which is fantastic. So you mentioned that you felt that you were pushing an anti-capitalist agenda that wasn't getting voiced in other parties or in other outlets in Northern Ireland. How would you describe said agenda?
Anti-capitalist agenda, yeah.
Yeah. For someone,
broadly,
for people that think that's like big and scary.
Oh yeah. Well, basically, I mean, you saw with the coronavirus, you saw, unprecedented intervention by the state in the economy. Even the Tory state, the Tory government, who have a lot to answer for in terms of their handling of the coronavirus, but they intervened in the economy in terms of protecting workers' wages, for the most part, and other measures. And that really, whilst they still are capitalists and neoliberal to their core, that's unprecedented in many ways. And I think for us, there's an ideology which is quite deep within the northern state and within Stormont, which basically says, we only get a certain pot of money from Westminster. We have to sort of dice that up as best as we can. And of course, we would like to spend money on X, Y, and Z, but we just can't do it. And for us, we reject that for many reasons, because obviously, first of all, Westminster has failed to properly invest in the north generally. But also, we live in a society in the UK and Ireland and in the north where there's a lot of people with a lot of money. There's millionaires, there's multimillionaires, and there's corporations who either don't pay tax or pay very little tax. So for us, it's to say at a very basic level, we need to push those arguments forward, which no real, on a big scale, on an all Ireland scale, no other party pushes those things. But also, I think we have to say that we have to go beyond that in terms of having a political and economic system which puts the vast majority of people first before the interests of a minority. And that may sound a bit sort of rhetorical and ideological, but in concrete terms, it means taking power and wealth of the powerful and wealthy and redistributing it into the hands of the majority. There's obviously a massive role for the state to play in that. But ultimately, I think there needs to be, in terms of my vision and our vision of socialism, it's a socialism from below, a democratic version where people are central to and involved in all the decisions that they make, because you can't have socialism without democracy. So I don't know if that's a long-winded way of answering your question, but in broad terms, I would say that.
There's a few things I want to address there, actually. You say that the Westminster failed to invest sufficiently in Northern Ireland. I would say that there's at least some extent to which we have had sufficient money pumped into Northern Ireland, but we've spent it poorly due to the segregation of quite a lot of our community and the fact that we end up wasting a lot of money. Do you think I'm being a bit harsh there? Or?
I think there's an element of truth. I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously we do live in a segregated, divided society. But to be frank with you, sometimes I see arguments being, not saying necessarily by you, but by others, arguments being pushed around segregation to justify, say, closing schools or closing leisure centres or reducing services that working class communities don't have a lot of. So there's that argument. I agree with you that Stormont has wasted money left, right, and centre. RHI for one. I think it's £1 million a day being spent on PFI and public-private partnerships. So I'm definitely not uncritical of Stormont, but there has been a withdrawal of several £billions from the Northern Block grant over the last 10 years since the Tory government got in with Cameron.
Is that real terms, or is that?
My understanding is real terms.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay.
And then also in that same period, the south of England has increased. I think the last figure I saw was certainly at least £1 billion, but it could be more. But so the south of England has received an injection of extra cash. Northern England, I presume Wales and Scotland, but I can't say for certain. And the north of Ireland has got less money. So I think historically, for all the talk of the United Kingdom from the British government's perspective, and they're happy to do one thing south of England and for London, by and large, and leave the north because it's further away. They should be, but they're not ultimately accountable in terms of elections to people here. So I think there's fundamental problems within that. But also, I think there's a critique, and we've tried to do this through the budget debate in Stormont. There's a critique of the economic agenda of the Stormont parties, who all buy into this. For all the rhetoric they spout about the NHS and supporting it, they buy into this ideology that public services have to be whittled down, have to be reduced, and even Sinn Fein, for all their left rhetoric, support that as well.
You mentioned there that there is, the British government have spent an outrageous amount of money on the coronavirus pandemic crisis. They've freed up huge, billions and billions and billions of pounds that they previously sort of said were not there. Then they were kind of there, but they were for Brexit, for the secret post-Brexit spending spree. But if we wanted to spend it on university fees, it wasn't okay for that. But they've suddenly found all this money, or they've been galvanized into accepting that some of their austerity dogma was kind of bullshit in a way. At least that's how I read it. But does that give you hope that the era of neoliberalism and that austerity government style of public spending is over? Or is this just a little blip, and as soon as we get back to it, we're going to go pure Thatcherism wave number 4, strip back everything that's not still nailed down?
Yeah, a good question. I think, it was a Theresa May said there was no magic money tree.
Yes.
And it turns out there's forests of it,
Modern monetary theory.
And so there's that point. And I think my hope is that there's a new kind of, a new normal, as they're mentioning, in terms of, the state it sort of reflects the need for more investment in low-paid workers and, health service and a lot of other things. So I hope that's the case. But my hunch is that, the Tories will, ride this out for a period of time. I don't know, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. And then they'll come back and say, excuse me, there's this bill. Our mates aren't going to pay for it. Our hedge fund manager friends aren't going to pay for it. You have to pay for it, and talk about national unity and national sacrifice. So that's my hunch. But also, I think it's not as simple as, say 2010, even when they launched a vicious austerity program. It wasn't plain sailing there for the Tories, but by and large got a lot of it through.
Well, they've adopted what I think it was the Paul Pinder, the head of Capita, called a salami technique. They just sliced off little bit by little bit by little bit over the past 10 years of public services and of public spending.
Yeah, and they'll probably try that again. But what's different this time is that there was again a big agenda then to say basically to put a divide between workers and people on benefits, and that's still large and still deep in many ways. But the idea now that healthcare workers don't deserve a pay raise, that people working in Iceland or Asda or Sainsbury's or whatever don't deserve fair wages, I think it's quite popular that those people deserve respected and supported. And also, somebody said this to me a while ago, that people were obviously clapping for the NHS and NHS workers. They weren't clapping for chief executives or hedge fund managers. So, I mean, it's not automatic that everybody therefore develops socialist ideas and becomes a radical. Things don't operate that way. But I think there's a mood in society that's, there's a class element to it. And I think if the Tories or Stormont come for people economically or financially, despite the fact that, by and large, pretty much most people, the vast majority, have sacrificed a lot and stayed at home and obey the measures. I think governments may want to go down that path, but I think they're quite nervous to do that because I think that there would be a severe backlash. That's my hope.
So wait, you're telling me that you're not going to be swept into Stormont on a wave of socialist like euphoria? People before profit take like 70% of the seats after people wake up and red pill like pure communism after.
I mean, I would love that, of course. If you're offering that and if you have a recipe for that, then I'm all ears. But I think it's I think from the sort of line of work that I'm in terms of building socialist parties and socialist movements, you want to be enthusiastic as possible, but understand that we do still live in a capitalist society in the sense that, and that may sound pessimistic, but it's not. It's saying there's massive opportunities. I'm very, very confident that we can grow our organization electorally and numerically, because of, what's happened with the coronavirus, unfortunately, in terms of people, being left and neglected and being financially punished, but also the sort of the Black Lives Matter movement as well. So I think we can grow ourselves, but also we do live in a society that still sort of churns out, the usual nonsense. So, it's kind of it's a bit of a great situation, but I'm quite confident for the future.
How much do you think that the whole coronavirus crisis, I was trying not to talk about it, but since we're on it, yeah. How much do you think that's like woken people up to the power of the state in a way? Because if you're, say, my age or even a little bit older, so I'm 26, born 94, say you go back like even 10, 15 years before that, especially in Northern Ireland, I'm not sure that there's that much living memory of the good that an interventionist government can do. Not always necessarily does do, but like the amount of power that a state has to make changes and invest in things and just really like produce the goods when it's an emergency and in a way that no corporation or multinational or individual could ever do. How much do you think people have been woken up to that? Because, for example, my mum, who I wouldn't be considered to be particularly, I'd say she's pretty centrist, she's one of those like garden centre liberals, basically, I would describe her as most of the time.
Nothing wrong with those people.
No. But she's something that she really commented on several times to me early on in the crisis was, why can they suddenly get rid of all the homeless people? That was something that she picked up on, and she was like, okay, why couldn't they do that before? If it was that easy and it's that much of a risk with this disease that we maybe don't know how serious it is or how much worse it is than like a standard flu that we get in like winters. Suddenly they've got the ability to just take all the homeless people off the streets. Why couldn't they do that before? Was basically her point. And do you think that it is a moment of change for this like our collective psyche, or is it just going to be forgotten in 6 months?
I'm hoping it's going to be significant, and I kind of concur with that in terms of what I've seen other people say. Things that were impossible. Or not feasible, we were told, as you said, not even just 10, 15 years ago, but maybe even 6 months ago or last year, are in some cases being done or partially done. There's legislation being brought through around sort of rent evictions in Stormont. For our part, they're not strong enough, and that's maybe a conversation for another day. But there's stuff being brought through even by Stormont and Westminster that they wouldn't have done a few years ago about benefit reductions and paying back sort of loans on benefits taken out. Now, they're kind of meager in terms of like the state should be doing more, but it's some kind of comfort to people in a tough situation. So I think you're right. I think there's the whole argument now about what the state should be doing. I mean, there was arguments even some people on the left. I can't remember who sort of popularized it, but saying that the state is irrelevant. Because of global capitalism and globalization, the state is no longer relevant. There was an argument kind of a couple of years ago made, maybe 10 years ago, around that. I and people before profit didn't accept it, but I think it's being blown out of the water. The state is powerful, as you said, can take unprecedented measures, and I hope that out of the it's a tragic situation, obviously, but out of this, I'm hoping that all those movements, are can be inspired, and the ceiling can be sort of raised higher for what's possible, even under capitalism and even under the current system. I think and hope that movements can be encouraged by what's being done to say, listen, you've done that then, well, why can't you do this now? So I'm quite hopeful.
Why back Brexit as a socialist? Is there not a serious fear of the Conservative British government just using it as an excuse to grant their long list of neoliberal wet dreams that I imagine some of the people like Dominic Raab have scrawled on their bedroom wall? Is Brexit not just giving them the ultimate blank check?
Well, hopefully not. Obviously, and for our part, we are opposed to pretty much everything the Tory party represents and is trying to do. And to put it bluntly, 2016 obviously seemed like a lifetime ago now. Only 4 years ago. 4 years ago this month, I think, isn't it? Or next month?
This month, 23rd of June. Oh, coming up 4 years from our Independence Day.
4 years, Independence Day. And so I think, I can come on to the critique of the sort of Tory approach and English nationalism in a second if you want. But for a socialist organisation, essentially neoliberalism is writ large into the EU. I think the problem has been throughout sort of the referendum and since is that the true experience of the EU wasn't really felt in the north, in the sense that talk to people by and large about the EU here, and it's seen as good in terms of helping to build bridges, helping to give jobs, and slightly paraphrasing, but in most people's heads, that's in short what it represents, and so some sort of rights. But for people in Greece, people in Italy, people in other parts of Europe, it's basically a economic hammer blow, and has destroyed people's lives in terms of implementing strict policies which say government debt has to be a certain level, states can't go beyond that, and very, very strict and stringent economic treaties and measures were put in place. So for that, we can't endorse it. Now, the Tory party obviously have an agenda, as you sort of rightly said, is about deregulation and all these kind of horrible, nasty stuff. But for us, we sort of seen that we can't back elites in Brussels or London, and we stand independent of those, which isn't always the easiest argument to get out, because especially here, Brexit, we're told, equals the Tories. So we kind of we don't say yay Brexit. We're saying we have fundamental critiques of the EU. We can't endorse it as an institution, but we believe people here voted to remain. And we're Democrats, and that should be respected. And I think there's a whole conversation in that, in terms of the national question, which has been sped up by the UK voting to leave, and in Scotland as well. So I think for us, it's saying that we can endorse what the EU is about, and not to mention all the stuff about refugees being drowned in Fortress Europe. So in basic terms, in short terms, that's what we'd say.
The refugee crisis still breaks my heart. I think it's one of the most morally indefensible things that our generation has kind of stood by and allowed to happen. I will never understand anyone not having sympathy from people who are literally willing to row across the Med in a tiny raft to escape. and to not have sympathy for them is
Yeah,
I will never get that. If I felt so desperately that my life in Northern Ireland, for example, was so bad that the only way that I could the only thing that I could countenance that was better than staying was to sail across the Irish Sea in a raft. I must be so fucking desperate. And the med is even worse.
yeah, exactly.
Maybe not as cold,
Exactly.
but I'd say it's pretty cold.
Yeah, exactly. And Fortress Europe was built by the European Union. Doing deals with the Libyan government to send people back. And this kind of stuff is not really talked about in a popular way. And freedom of movement should exist for people in the European Union and in European states, but it should extend to people in Syria, in Libya, and Lebanon, and Mali, and Egypt, and unfortunately that's not the European project. Which so it's a left critique of the EU, but in politics here, that's kind of sort of cast aside, which isn't too uncommon.
How much chance do you think Northern Ireland has as a state now post Brexit? Are we destined now without any other chance or choice to basically just slowly drift towards a United Ireland in some point in the next 20 to 30 years? Is that where we just inevitably end up now? Or is there another path? Can Northern Ireland succeed as a state?
I don't think it can. Whether sort of, as you ask, whether United Ireland just kind of happens, I think a lot of people are for ending partition and for United Ireland, but I don't think it's as straightforward as saying it'll happen. But I know your point that you're making. I think it's the northern states being discredited. Historically it was kind of Republicans and some elements of nationalism and some elements of socialism and the left who sort of were against the northern state and argued for it essentially to go. But you're seeing a section of people who maybe vote Alliance, vote sort of other parties. Sort of, I don't know if you wanted to sort of describe them as liberal Protestant or liberal Unionist or whatever. But there's a cohort of people who, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, sorry, well, maybe before Brexit, would not have thought about the possibility of ending the northern state. And I think there's just people like that, and there's a common sense to it,
But do you think that's because of Brexit, or do you think that's because it coincided with the collapse of Stormont for 3 years? Do you think that just pushed people over the edge in terms of what they're willing to put up with in order to have our own governance here?
I think it's both. I think it's both, to be frank. And a sense of as well of we're still. I mean, I know coronavirus is not to be talked about today. Well, look, if you look at the sort of the way London responded or didn't respond to the coronavirus, I mean, people here still feel that and it's true. We're by and large we're still beholden to London. Beholden to Westminster financially, and for the most part, for a lot of cases, politically and policy issues. So I think there's a section of people who are equal marriage, who are pro-choice, and they'll see obviously Westminster made moves on those issues, but I think that this is the feel that we should be able to to say for ourselves and have a situation where in the south, obviously, there's abortion legislation and measures in place. There was equal marriage before it existed in the north, and I think there's a sense of people who may not have historically been for ending the border. Who are like, I want a part of that. I want to live on an island that's more progressive. Now, how they vote in a border poll is maybe is anybody's guess, or certainly it's up for debate and up for persuasion. But I think the solidity of the northern state is not as solid as it was, in 1988, in 2010, and even 2016. So I think it's very, very fragile. And I think unionism really the only argument that unionism is putting across is that stability. We can't break up the UK because instability. And you talk to people, people's lives are unstable, and there's poverty, there's inequality. So that I think that argument is discredited. There's also the fact that the argument around the NHS is always used by the DUP and UUP. You can't vote for United Ireland because the NHS.
See, that's one of the few things that keeps me from thinking, okay, yeah, I would vote for United Ireland. I love the NHS, just as like a principle thing. I think it's fantastic and is the way healthcare should happen.
Yeah, totally agree. But as the NHS was not a gift from the British state. The NHS was created out of the sacrifice or slaughter, whatever word you want to use, of the Second World War, and there was a fear that there was a fear of revolution at home. There was obviously the Labour Party that kind of got elected, Nye Bevan, and so on and so forth, created it. But also, those same unionist parties here have spent how many years underfunding, disinvesting, and not
corporatizing. That's the one that gets me.
Corporatizing, that's the good word. Corporatizing the NHS. So it's like, come on. So yes, the NHS is a good. It's been cut down and stripped back, but the essence of the NHS is essential. And from our part, we want to see that all across the island. We're involved in a campaign about creating an all Ireland, the NHS, and I think we obviously that's our position, that's our policies, our politics, and we want to see that happen. And so, from our part, any United Ireland has to be central to it. Otherwise, what are you doing? Otherwise, how are you going to convince the vast majority of people to vote against or leave the devil they know?
Well, that is a fantastic place to leave it, because I'm aware you have to go on and you have another meeting and whatnot, but that feels like a nice finishing statement. But definitely thank you very much for your time. It was a really interesting chat.
Thanks, Josh. Enjoyed it very much.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, on Facebook, on Twitter, or to our mailing list. You'll find the links for everything in the description below. Until next time, thanks for listening.